we are back. All right. Left off talking about these forensic questions that we need to formulate. They're going to help us build this examination plan. And what these forensic questions are going to do are going to build us a bridge. I'll fill in that gap here in just a minute. All right, so we talked about a little bit about this examination plan, why it's important. And again, I want to reemphasize that it is not easy. And that's why it can often be overlooked. I don't want to take the time because it's not something that I can do in a few seconds. I want to get right into the evidence and get into it and move on and do what I got to do. So getting your mind wrapped around making that a priority, making that something that you do up front in every case, making that a habit, can be hard to do. So let's talk about what exactly is an examination plan. What does that look like? All right. So what this examination plan is going to do for us, all right, is going to give us a way to approach this particular case, this particular piece of evidence, given the facts and circumstances. All right. First thing it's going to tell us is what kind of hardware am I going to use. All right. Different kinds of technology may require a different kind of hardware. All right. Let's say, for example, a regular desktop computer versus a mobile device. You may have to use Celebrite versus FTK, for example, or a computer. All right. You may have to have certain hardware. Also, you may have to have certain software. Tools like FTK and Encase are kind of like the Swiss Army knife in forensics. They do a lot of things, right? And they do some things well, some things not so well. But rarely do you find one tool that's going to do all things equally well. There's probably going to be one tool that does a certain aspect of digital forensics maybe a little bit better. So what software am I going to use? All right. And we talked about this a little bit too, is what search strategies and techniques are we going to use? How are we going to be looking for? How are we going to sift through that evidence to find what we're looking for? So the search strategies and techniques, and what's going to be the most effective approach to this case and this evidence. So what we're talking about here is this gap between the physical world and the virtual world. All right, we're going to fill in this gap and this bridge. We're going to build this bridge to overcome that gap. So in this physical world, we've got these investigative and legal questions. All right, these are on the physical side, and then on the virtual side, we're going to have this digital forensic and examination process, the digital forensics and examination process. So how are we going to bridge these two worlds? Is these forensic questions. These forensic questions are going to do that for us. There's a couple of famous forensic scientists by the name of Keith Inman and Nora Rudin, all right? And they came up with these principles and processes that are kind of this core set of all forensic sciences. So these things are going to be applicable to toxicology, crime scene, DNA, all those things. So some of these core forensic principles and processes can be used across multiple forensic disciplines. So at its core, all right, all forensic science disciplines answer this core set of questions. Okay, and what they're going to do is they're going to help us identify, classify, associate, reconstruct, and conduct individualization. All right. So these principles and processes that we use to achieve these things is kind of global in the world of forensics. All right. So we're talking about identification. All right. What exactly is this thing? All right. What is this? What is that? All right. So in our world, all right, we're talking about maybe file types. All right. What kind of file type it is, and we discussed that a minute ago about what do we use to identify a file type. We use the extension. The answer would be no, right? We don't use the extension. The tool uses what? The headers. The tool uses the headers. So the file extensions are irrelevant in tools like FTK and Encase. It's hitting on the header and not the extension, all right? So now I want to talk about classification and individualization. Classification and individualization, or what we're talking about here is coming from a common point of origin or a common source, common origin. Anybody have any ideas here on what that might be? Some examples, maybe not in digital, but in other kind of forensics disciplines. Coming from a common origin, what might we be? What's another example of that? Outside of digital. Think about murders. What kind of evidence do we find in murder scenes? DNA, all right. So what would be the common origin? All right, we got blood spatter here, bloody fingerprint back there, and blood drops over there. What might be our common origin? Could be the suspect, could be the victim, but we've got some kind of origin for that blood, right? We know we got a point of origin. Those different artifacts, if you will, okay, come from a common origin. All right. One of the most, probably the easiest to wrap your head around, perhaps, is firearms. All right, that's what that is right there. Those are striations on a bullet, fired bullet. Anybody shoot in here? You guys? All right. What makes these marks? Anybody know? Barrel, lands and grooves, right? So actually, what's going on here is inside of the barrel of that firearm, the manufacturing process itself can create unique marks in that barrel, which those unique marks are then imparted on the bullet as it propels itself down or propels down the barrel. So it makes those marks. So here we're going to lining up two bullets, right? We've got an unknown, so they pulled out of the body, and then we've got a known that we recover our weapon and fired in the lab, and we compare the two. All right, so then we can figure out if it's coming from that common origin, the same gun, right? So, in the firearms side, we classify things how? By what? How would you classify a piece of firearms evidence, perhaps, as far as belonging to a certain group? Caliber, all right. Okay, type, manufacturer, okay, good, all right. Excellent, all right. And those are called class characteristics. All right, so basically when you're talking any kind of forensic science, things generally have one of two kinds of characteristics. They have class characteristics, all right. In other words, it's a 9mm, all right. It may have been fired from any one of hundreds of thousands of 9mm weapons out there, but it's a 9mm. So we know it's a caliber, it belongs to that group, but do we know it's that, not a specific 9mm weapon, right? So in the digital side, when we start to classify things, we can put it in a certain class or group. We can do that by data type, all right? Word processing file. So we might find, what kind of, give you some examples here. Word, and what's the extension we're looking for there? DOC, DOCX, depends on the version, right? What are some other ones, all right? So we've got application, Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, text editors, almost an endless array of applications out there, right? More than we can even, probably wrap our head around, all right? Metadata. Date and time is just one example of many, all right? Pieces of metadata that's out there. Content, keywords. So it may contain the address 123 Main Street, for example, all right? All right, so now back to this classification and individualization thing just a bit. Again, going back to the bullet side of things, diameters and weights, shapes, and markings can help us. All right, we may recover a bullet that is what? Not in good shape, right? It may have come in contact with some surface or material that's harder than itself. It's going to cause some pretty significant deformity in that bullet. So we may not be able to get a pristine example from the scene, right, that looks like that, all right, that is perfectly mushroomed. It's got some excellent, lands and grooves here. We can really use making the comparison on that projectile is going to be not so difficult, right? So what happens if that thing is smashed up, broken, fragmented, and torn apart? How do we then make that classification? All right, one of the ways might be the weight. All right, you can make some general presumptions, if you will, based on the weight of the round. All right, certain bullets and calibers, you can kind of set some guardrails. If it weighs X, you can kind of say, yeah, that could be any one of these. So what we're basically doing is narrowing things down, using the evidence we have available to narrow things down. So the weight is one way. If we recover the base of the bullet, we can take measurements and determine the diameter. All right, use that. Those measurements can help put us in a certain class, all right? So we can say that's a 9mm versus a 45, all right? The shape, and then lastly, the markings on the round can also, different weapons perhaps can put unique markings. Not all rifling is the same. Glocks, for example, put a different rifling mark on a projectile versus, let's say, 6 Sauer or another kind of pistol, all right? So we can then use that, the markings on the round, to put it into a different class. But what we're really looking for is this, right? A lot of times that's kind of we're using classification to take this broad spectrum of stuff, and then we want to start to narrow that down, all right? So what we're really after is this individualization. So we talked a minute ago about Glocks, for example, right? They put this unique rifling. They have a unique hectagonal and octagonal barrels, all right? And they don't really have traditional lands and grooves in them. So what happens is is you really have and I know this is off the topic, but fun fact, you actually get a tighter bullet to barrel fit out of these Glocks because there is no lands and grooves, no gas escapes. All right, so that's kind of a unique marking. Not all manufacturers use that. Okay, so once we have a projectile, right, and we know that it's got that hectagonal rifling in there, we know that's going to be from a Glock 45. All right, but we don't know is it that specific Glock 45. All right, that's what we need to be able to show. That is what we need to be able to show, that is the murder weapon. By putting in that class, we know what we're looking for, but we've got to be able to match that up and make that unique or individual characteristics. Okay. So on the digital side, all right, file signatures. We use file signatures to help do that. All right. One thing we may be able to use is fuzzy hashing. What's fuzzy hashing? What's a fuzzy hash?
Fragments of the data being identical data.
All right. Yeah, that's what's going to help us find.
Slightly modified.
It's. Say again.
Slightly modified.
Slightly modified. It's close. All right. So a hash, right, is like digital DNA or digital fingerprint, right? So when you've got a hash value, I can match that up, and I can say with mathematical certainty that those two things are identical, right? So a fuzzy hash is going to say they're not an exact match, but that's pretty close. Okay, so then what that means is this fuzzy hash is going to find things that are fragments of an identical data set. So even if, what happens to, let's say if you've got a picture of me, and I pull out one pixel from picture B, and then I take a hash value of that, what's going to happen to the hash value? Totally different, radically different, right? So fuzzy hashing may find that other one, even though it's been modified slightly. All right, so fuzzy hashing is kind of close enough, if you will. All right. So what this is, and now we're on to association. So when we talk about associating, all right, things, we're talking about here is we're kind of the ability to infer contact between two pieces of evidence. So we go back to our murder scene. We want to infer contact between, let's say, a suspect and this room. We may find shoe prints, may find DNA, might find blood spatter. We want to be able to tie that person into this room. We can infer contact, and we can associate them with the evidence in here with something that they possess. All right, we can infer contact between them and this crime scene, for example. So let's talk about that a second. Fingerprints, one example of how we could do that. All right, fingerprints is just one example of how we can associate in the real world. All right. So digitally, presence of files. All right. Just because that file is there, that may indicate some association. All right. Let's say if they're, again, it is all context specific. So let's say you're working on a theft of intellectual property. All right. And you're looking for a specific file. You may find that file on the system. Okay. That's a little bit weak. But if you've got a biometric login to put that person there, how much better is that? Much, right? So it's a sliding scale, if you will. So that presence of the file would be weak, better than nothing, right? Again, in context, but that biometric is going to be much, much stronger way to associate somebody with that. So we can still, even though we're talking about digital, we can still make that association with a wide variety of objects, right? So what we're talking about here is including, even on the digital side, we're still talking about including people, computers, and networks. So we can associate those things together with digital evidence. We can put people together. We can put people with computers. We can put devices on a network. We can put people on a network. All those things can be used, okay, to associate those things. All right, we're talking about reconstruction. Reconstruction. We can do different kinds of analysis with that evidence. All right. To reconstruct events. What that means is, in a broad sense, is to order events in a particular space of time. And how we can do that is we can create timelines. A lot of the tools that we use have timeline features built in. So we've got that magic Staples easy button, create timelines sometimes, right? So we can start doing all that. We can do packet reconstruction. We can put together and look at the browser history, for example, all right? And we can start to reconstruct what has actually happened on that machine or that network. Any questions so far? Sir?
Can I cut in for about 2 minutes?
Sure.
Okay. Giving away some T-shirts and stickers And I've got 2 questions for each. Got to answer them correctly. What B-list actor hosted Unsolved Mysteries? There you go. See, 3 easy. Okay, what tool can you use to view and watch the network? Swords. What? Sorry. If the shirts aren't the right size, then just come out here and we'll put them out. Don't worry, there'll be more things.
What? All right. Good call. It was Robert Stack. Is that right? Wow. Deep knowledge. Interesting. All right, so like I said, one of the things we're talking about in forensics is just reconstruction of events. What exactly happened and what sequence did it occur, et cetera. So we can use timelines, packet reconstruction, and browser history are just a few examples of what we can do to reconstruct events. All right. Other big questions. All right. How far do we go, and when do we know when we're done? When do you know when you're done? How do you know when you've gone far enough? Could be money. Absolutely. Pockets dry up. 100%. Prison. All right. All right. Could be. Good. So, back in the day, all right, we used to think about, with computer forensics, we just inferred that we had to go through every single byte. Because we wanted to be, leave no stone unturned, no cluster unturned, if you will, right? So the thorough examination meant we went through every single byte of data on that media, all right? No longer can we do that. No longer can we do that for the obvious reasons that we've talked about limited resources and time, but there's another reason coming down the pike, all right? There's another reason coming down the pike that you guys need to be aware of, all right? Digital evidence, as you know, is starting to find its way more and more into courtrooms across the country. In criminal cases, in civil cases, we're seeing it in internal investigations where you're going to sanction an employee. All right. So as we start to get more and more invasive, if you will, into people's data. All right. The courts are starting to take more and more notice of this, and they are getting concerned about the privacy issues. All right. Privacy is a huge thing. Privacy is a huge thing, as we've all seen ripped from the headlines, if you will. All right. So courts are starting to have some serious concerns about this, all right, about these examinations that we're doing. When we get somebody's data, or when we get somebody's hard drive in, for example, and we're investigating a certain crime or a certain event or a certain thing, right? So what's on your phone? What kind of stuff do you carry around on your phone? You've got maybe some business records. You've got some business contacts. But what else do you have? You probably got some family photos. You've got some personal things, your own personal Facebook. You've got personal communications. You've got things that are, you're mixing business and personal stuff, right? So we may only be investigating a small sliver of what's on that device, all right? So the courts are starting to ask, what right do we have, or do they have, or the government, or the police, or the company has to look willy-nilly through that device? Just because you're looking for one thing, does that give you carte blanche to go through all of it? All right? The answer is starting to be no. The answer is starting to be no. So what they're wanting to see, what they're going to start asking for, it may not happen tomorrow, it may not happen even this year, maybe not even next. But if you look in your crystal ball, Magic 8 Ball says they're going to start cracking down on, I get a hard drive and I get carte blanche to look through whatever I want to look through. There's no limitations on it. Once I get legal authority to look at that drive, it's all open to me. You know, that drive is my oyster and I can do whatever I want to with it, right? They're going to start cracking down on that. Okay, because not all of that is relevant. Sir?
That is different from business to business, correct?
As far as, what do you mean?
When you say carte blanche, that's where I work. I think source. We find one thing on their computer that gives us free range to look through the computer.
Maybe today, yeah, sure. And that might be fine, and I'm not a lawyer and don't play one on TV. But
what I'm saying is it can differ from business to business.
It could.
This business could say, you find this, you have to look in that area, but this business can say, you find one thing, we want you to look at the rest of the stuff. Right?
Sure. Sure.
I just want to make sure I was
What if you had, like, say you bought a device,
Like refurbished?
No, you bought it, like, from AT&T, you bought it for the company, gave it to your users, and you had him go through, you sign the documentation, and you go through all that. Do you think that's going to become, where they're going to narrow that down?
Depends. It may. I mean, it's good. It really.
They signed the document saying
sure.
we have every full range.
That maybe. I mean, that's something to be aware of. That they're going to start. This is starting to creep its way into the judiciary's thought process. That these devices contain so much stuff. When this first started, case law looked at cell phones, for example. A lot of times there was actually judges that compared that to a wallet. Try to wrap your head around what's actually stored. If you print it out into a physical medium, everything that's on that phone, you would never get that into a regular billfold, right? It contains so much more stuff than was ever intended or could be carried in a physical wallet. So now they're starting to really get worried about this because it carries so much stuff that may be outside the scope of any outside the legal scope of a search.
Going off what he was saying, I find it difficult that if a corporate or company provide advice, how the government can say you're not allowed to search. If you sign this, wherever you get it, basically it's free reign by the company.
Sure. Well, I agree. I'm totally down with you there, but I'm saying that it may come a time. So, I see what you're saying. I'm not saying, they're just starting to, judges are talking about this. And a lot of times they don't, again, unfortunately, it's going to be tipping. But a lot of times now you've got older judges that really don't embrace technology, that hate it. And I know judges right now in this state that don't check their own email. They get somebody else to actually print their email, which they then respond to it in writing, and then they have that other person type the response. All right, so now that person's going to get a case involving digital evidence and go, not have a clue.
That would be very interesting to see if they did it that way. It's a lot of fun stuff.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think you're in the right way going with the company-owned device. Where it gets really weird is if you start the BYOD thing, where you bring your own device. Then where do you go? Then what legal ramifications do you have? Right now, there is legal precedent right now to be able to go through it.
Then where they can't take screenshots and all that.
Right, it gets to be really complicated.
To see if you have a BYOD and you have some type of agreement or contract that you sign, and you first put that device on your network, then ta-da! I get to go through it all.
Also, you're getting a lot of devices where you can separate two different hard drives on it, different spaces. So you have your company and your personal. I can see where they say on a BYOD device, you can search the company side, like in the Knox security.
Like if you have the
Right.
security,
So but how many users are actually going to segregate their data from that's going to be the trick, in that BYOD thing. So it's all going to be chocolate and peanut butters all over the place. You know what I mean?
That would be where the company by default would say everything goes into Knox, and then the person has to switch back to get to the personal. So then you can go basically everything they have.
And you'll get case law though that shows that BYOD policies might not be binding. So depending on how they're written, who signs them,
That's keywords.
who actually built them.
That's the thing, is who signed it and what it was.
Not even who signs it from an employee, but who signs it from a legal. Is it legally binding?
And it just takes the right judge,
Right.
to undo all this. You know what I mean? It
Case
takes
law
the
that
one.
goes both ways for it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense, and it's the way it ought to be. But you get one judge who goes off the reservation, and it changes the landscape. That's what's, what can be rough. All right. So just bear in mind that you may have to at some point, all right, need to be able to articulate the goals and objectives for any examination that you did to show that you were being objectively reasonable. All right. That you weren't in there just digging around to look for stuff for entertainment value, right? That you were only going after certain things, and you weren't in there digging around in their stuff just because you could. So having this examination plan and documenting it is one way that you're going to be able to defend yourself against accusations like this. Is that not only did I not do that, but before I even started, I came up with this plan because I knew I was going to do that. I knew I didn't have time to do that, but I also set these parameters based on this investigation or this kind of circumstance. All right, reconstruction. So what actions do we need to reconstruct? In our example here that we use, what do we need to reconstruct? The actual alteration of those receipts, right? So now we have that. We kind of what we're talking about here is reverse engineering that crime, if you will. What happened and how would they have done that? All right. What actions did they take on that device to create those files in question? So what artifacts would that process leave? So what we're going to try to find here, what we need to develop, is a list of this falsifiable hypothesis, hypotheses which answers these forensic questions. So what I mean by falsifiable, all right? So what we can do is we come up with these hypotheses, all right, and then we can either prove them to be true or false. So, for example, for identification and classification, all right, my hypothesis would say XYZ Corporation travel vouchers will be found on a suspect computer. That's either true or not true. There's a binary answer to that, right? It's either there or it's not there. Check. Receipts supporting those vouchers are going to be found on that suspect's computer. That's either true or not true, right? Original unaltered receipts are going to be found on that computer, true or not true. Receipts showing alteration are going to be found on that computer, true or not true, right? So these are the identification and classification kind of questions, if you will. Association, software capable of altering those original receipts are going to be found on the suspect's computer. True or not true? For reconstruction, indications that such software was actually used to alter those receipts is going to be located on that suspect's computer. Okay? So these are the kinds of things, if you can come up with this up front, this is what's going to help guide you through your examination, give you some direction, set those guidelines, or those guardrails, if you will, to keep you focused, all right? And it's also going to let you know when you're done. When you've done what you can do, you're going to know. So back in the day, we developed this culture, all right? When we got digital evidence back in the computer forensic days, all right? We had this culture that sort of grew up, all right, that we believed we had to go through every piece of data, all of it, every byte, anywhere, all of it, to be thorough. Had to be examined. We had to go through every bit of it. Must be examined. Today, that is just not the case for a variety of reasons that we've talked about. The lack of resources, etc. Right? All right. So, any questions? No questions? Sir? Notes.
Very crucial in the investigation.
1,000%.
Because when you were talking about going down rabbit holes and everything, or the need to go search through everything, if you can justify in your notes why you needed to go to multiple things, that can save you also.
Absolutely true. And a lot of folks, I fear, do not take, we call them bench notes. It doesn't need to be, there's no one hard and fast rule that says this is what a bench note is and this is what the format. You can do them by hand. You can do them, there's software that you can have on your machine that you can do them, and the ones that I've seen actually will date and timestamp automatically for you, that you just type in some notes. The key things there, they're legible, they're to be read and understood by someone else, and somebody can reproduce what you've done based on those notes, all right? And it can save your bacon 2, 3, 4 years down the road, because the courts move really slow, right? Courts move extremely slow, and you're going to have other things to do. So that's going to be your own recollection.
Even when you're collecting the evidence, when you do your initial image collection, you mess up something. Definitely right now, if you messed it up, so that if that comes along later, you can justify or you can say what happened. Clicking on something, I've seen times where you want to use the keywords as much as you can. Use the mouse. Sometimes they can take a shortcut and make that malicious, mess. So if you click on open up the Explorer or something like that, it'll execute something. So if you can do command line, it saves a lot of your stuff also.
Right, absolutely, 100%. Like I said, I worry that a lot of folks are getting out of that strong desire to get things done and to be quick. They skip these steps that are often thought of being tedious and all that, the detailed notes and all those things, but that is extremely crucial. And that is a forensic best practice. I mean, that is well published and well accepted. If you're going to call yourself a forensic person and do forensic work, documentation and detailed notes is a bare minimum, right? So we got to get into that. I pulled a lot of this from one of these books that I've written, Digital Forensics, Threatscape, and Best Practices. This chapter that I ran through, or this material, was written by a guy named Mark Pollitt. You might know who Mark is, or heard of Mark? Mark is a retired FBI agent. He was actually the first FBI agent to be designated as a digital forensics person way back in the day. So Mark is like a living, breathing, walking piece of history. And we actually have Mark. Mark will be talking he's spoken to Marshall a few times, and we hope to have him back at our conference in April. Super good guy, super sharp guy, very, 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 very smart. Like I said, he's been there, done that, and good stuff. All right, that's basically all I've got. Thank you guys much.
Thanks, sir.